Good morning and good afternoon to good morning to those here in North America, and good afternoon to those elsewhere. Welcome to the Doddle Institute Global Health seminar and launch of the Safe Water Optimization Tool. Before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous territory. And as this is a hybrid event, some guests are on different territories. So please take the time to give thanks and respect to the land on which you are currently living and working. We are based here in Toronto, and I'm here at York University on the campus in Toronto. And this campus is situated on the traditional territorial area known as Takaranto, and we acknowledge its current treaty holders, which are the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also acknowledge this as the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and of course the Métis. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. With that acknowledgement, I'm absolutely delighted to begin the seminar, and particularly to highlight the importance of the Safe Water Optimization Tool. This is the launch event of the second version of the Safe Water Optimization Tool that we have developed here at the Doddle Institute in partnership with the Lausanne School of Engineering, and also in partnership with Médecins Sans Frontières, and in partnership with a number of other players and actors that will become evident over the course of the morning. The Safe Water Optimization Tool, as we originally conceived it, was really an effort to address very practically and through a critical problem-solving approach some of the real challenges that people face in humanitarian crises from a health perspective. The single most important cause of morbidity and mortality in humanitarian emergencies that is remediable through appropriate intervention and appropriate technology is waterborne infectious disease. Waterborne infectious disease account in some circumstances for up to 50% of all morbidity and mortality in humanitarian emergencies. And so what we tried to do under the very practical leadership of Professor Imran Ali, what we tried to do was develop a strategy to address waterborne infectious diseases in humanitarian emergencies, and to develop tools that can reduce the probability of infectious disease outbreaks, and also that can be used at a very practical, hands-on, immediate level to take appropriate action to reduce those risks. We generated a first generation, which have been highly successful and have been tested in a number of sites around the world, which Imran and others will talk about. And this now is our effort to launch a second version of the Safe Water Optimization Tool. And this will essentially, we're going to talk today about some of the functionalities and some of the very practical challenges that we've had with the first version, and how to address those, and also how to extend the reach of the optimization tools through our second version. I will ask that you can read more in terms of detail of the work that we've been doing on our website. And I would also ask that as we proceed through the course of the launch, that you submit your comments and question via the chat box or the Q&A box. And I would also ask that if you have any questions or issues that you'd like to discuss verbally, please just raise your hand using the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. I also want to just mention that, and quite importantly, that the safe water optimization tool, as we have developed it, really fits within the approach of the Institute, the Doddle Institute here at York University. And our approach is really to take a critical problem-solving view of major global health challenges. And we really focus in three areas. One is planetary health, which is the relationship between human civilizations and the biosphere within which we exist, and really trying to understand that in terms of very practical health outcomes. And then the other, a second theme is global health foresighting, which is imagining the global health that we want, and using critical social science perspectives, also critical STEM or social science, technology, engineering, and math perspectives to develop new tools around designing, if you will, the global health that we want. And there, for example, we're using artificial intelligence and machine learning tools to develop better clinical public health priority planning and implementation capacity for the global south and also for the global north. This is a new initiative that comes out of our work over the last 3 years on COVID, and working with 8 African nations over the last 3 years to provide them with daily policy prescriptions around COVID interventions. And then the third theme, so the first is planetary health, the second is global health and global health foresighting, and then the third theme is global health and humanitarianism. And this is really where this, in this third theme, the safe water optimization tool emerges, and is very much focused on the tool and the theme itself, very much focused on very practical clinical public health interventions that improve the circumstances of people in humanitarian emergencies. And with that, I would just like to take this opportunity to introduce Jennifer Heinemann, who's the Associate Vice President of Research here at York University, and who supports the research institutions or the research actors across the university to really bring the best of what the university has to offer to very practical problems. Okay, so we'll come back to Jennifer, and maybe what I'll do now is I'm just going to ask Imran to recap the core challenge that the safe water optimization tools are focused on, and also to recap or to address the core public health engineering challenge, and perhaps talk a little bit about our experience to date with the first generation in Bangladesh and in Nigeria, Tanzania, and also perhaps Imran outline where we are going with version 2. So why don't you, if you're able, Imran, why don't you take that on?
Yeah. So hi everybody, can you hear me? Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much, James, for the warm introduction. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for being here to welcome us and kick us off on this event and this journey. I'm really, really pleased to have this opportunity to share with you SWOT version 2. And thank you, James, for the comments contextualizing the SWOT here at the Doddle Institute. And at York, I feel like the SWOT really is an example of some of the really cutting edge work that we do here at York, trying to solve critical public health problems facing the most vulnerable by mobilizing the best in scientific and engineering and other kinds of research to address those problems. So I'm really, really pleased to have the SWOT here at York at the Doddle Institute. So thank you for that warm introduction. Thank you as well to all the attendees joining us from around the world. It's so wonderful to have you here with us for this launch. Many of you we've been working with over the past few years. Many of you are new to the SWOT. What I want to do today is tell you a bit about version 2 and how it can help you deliver safe water in the humanitarian projects that you're working on today. And we look forward to you as a team working with you in the coming months to get you using the SWOT and helping deliver safe water to those people who need it the most. Now, here's an overview of what we'll discuss today. So the first hour or so is going to be some presentations. It won't just be me speaking, thankfully. So first I'll talk about, as James had mentioned, the Public Health Engineering Challenge and the evolution of the SWOT in response to that challenge. And then I'll hand it over to our field technical advisor extraordinaire, Mr. James Brown, who will walk us through what the SWOT version 2 looks like and feels like. After that, we'll have comments from Michael DeSanti, our graduate modeling researcher, and Professor Usman Khan, the SWOT modeling lead, on where we've come in developing the modeling engines under the hood of the SWOT and the roadmap for the new SWOT products and analytics to come. Then we'll wrap up the part of presentations with a field user perspective from Jeff Fessile, the Watson Unit Coordinator at MSF OCA, who's been our core champion ensuring the operational alignment of the SWOT with the needs of their organization and the sector more widely. After those presentations, we'll have about a 20-minute Q&A panel discussion with the presenters that'll be moderated by Professor Rubinski. So please continue to add your questions into the chat and we'll come to them during the Q&A panel. And finally, we'll wrap up with some closing remarks, both from myself and from Professor Urbinsky. But let me dive in to what is the public health engineering challenge that the SWOT is here to address. Now, as many of you in the room know, waterborne diseases are amongst the leading causes of mortality and morbidity, especially in refugee and IDP camps during humanitarian emergencies. In the humanitarian sector, we treat water with a number of methods, but one of the most widely used methods is chlorination. And chlorination is really important in the humanitarian sector because it provides lasting protection against pathogenic recontamination. Now, humanitarian responders are guided by core standards in the sector. This includes the SPHERE Handbook, the MSF Public Health Engineering Manual, the Oxfam Water Treatment Guidelines, the UNHCR Field Manual. All of these key guidance documents generally tell us the same thing, that free residual chlorine, or FRC for short, at water distribution points should be between 0.2 and 0.5 milligrams per liter under normal conditions, or increased to 0.5 to 1 milligram per liter during outbreaks or when pH or turbidity of that raw water are elevated. Now, what's important is that these are intended as universal targets that are applicable in any emergency setting around the world. Now, typically in a camp setting, we rely on centralized water treatment using chlorination, right? And our usual practice is to monitor FRC levels after about 30 minutes or 60 minutes of contact time, and then to follow up with monitoring at the tap stand. This is the critical point where we're meant to deliver those universal FRC targets at the tap stands. But what happens after that water is collected, transported home, and then stored and used over many hours? Even if that water is originally safe at the collection point, we often don't know whether that residual protection is sufficient to persist through that last mile of the safe water chain before drinking. That could be 6 to 24 hours later, depending on the situation in the particular setting we're working in. Now, we encountered this problem firsthand during a major hepatitis E outbreak in refugee camps in South Sudan. There, we observed that even if water meets the humanitarian FRC standards at the distribution point, that FRC protection only persists for a short period of time, and then pretty quickly thereafter falls below that protective threshold, leaving the water vulnerable to being recontaminated by waterborne pathogens. And there are, in fact, many reports about water being recontaminated after distribution, leading to the spread of waterborne illnesses amongst displaced populations. We described this problem in a paper in the Bulletin of the World Health Organization, based on experience in South Sudan. Now, what we saw in South Sudan and in other sites that we worked was that chlorine decay after distribution is really significant and is really rapid. So what we need to be able to do is model that chlorine decay so we know how much to add at the beginning to ensure the right amount persists through that last mile and arrives at the point of consumption. Now, unlike the initial chlorine demand of raw water or the decay that occurs during distribution in tanks and pipes before the tap, what happens after the tap, that post-distribution period, is really challenging to model. It depends on factors that are related to the environment, to the raw water quality, users' behaviors, that are very site specific, they're very variable, and they're not really well understood in terms of what kind of impact it has on the water quality. And the modeling is important because it's not just a matter of adding more chlorine. A chlorine dose that is too small results in the risk of recontamination, but too much chlorine can lead to acceptance issues around taste and odor rejection. So we have to get the modeling right so we know how much we need to deliver to protect public health, but not have so much as to drive rejection. That's where the SWOT comes in. The SWOT uses the water quality monitoring data that we already collect in the sector to model how FRC decays after distribution, and then uses these models to provide site-specific and evidence-based water chlorination targets that keep water safe all through that last mile of the safe water chain to where it's actually consumed. So for example, the SWOT may suggest in a particular water system that the target FRC at tap stands needs to be at least 0.9 milligrams per liter in order to maintain that protection for up to 15 hours. Since there's so many different things that can happen to water after it leaves a tap stand, there's a wide range of chlorine decay rates in actuality. The modeling tools that the SWOT deploys are probabilistic and provide a forecast of household water safety, given the natural range of conditions that are encountered in the real-world field setting. The SWOT provides a summary of the current household water safety at the site with current practices and the predicted improvement in household water safety if the SWOT target recommendation is implemented at tap stands. Now, this information is critical for deciding what action is needed to improve water safety at the sites that humanitarian responders manage. This could mean increasing FRC at the tap stand, but it could also mean slowing down chlorine decay in the setting by, for instance, rolling out a jerry can cleaning campaign or through better water storage. Based on those site-specific conditions, we can help you identify what are the most appropriate strategies for improving water safety. And as the situation changes, the SWOT modeling takes this into account and adapts, reflecting the current situation and generating a time-specific and suitable recommendation for the current prevailing conditions. Let me give you a quick overview of how it works. So the SWOT takes the water quality monitoring data from tap stands and households that are already being collected in many sites around the world. Field workers can take that data and upload their monitoring data to the cloud, to the SWOT, where it's processed using our numerical modeling and machine learning engines. These generate a site-specific and evidence-based FRC target that ensures water safety for a user-specified duration of household storage time. So in some settings, that might be 15 hours, in other settings, that might be 24 hours, in other settings, it might be 12. Depending on the local conditions, we can specify a chlorination target to protect it for that duration. It also specifies what is the household water safety that we can expect if we implement the target compared to the status quo practice. Now, how does it work? There are two modeling engines under the hood. The first is based on chemical engineering first principles using a process-based numerical modeling techniques. These are an adaptation of the chlorine decay modeling systems that are used in the closed system of distribution pipe networks and adapts it to the open system of the post-distribution setting. The second approach we take in the SWOT is based on machine learning using ensembles of ANNs. And both of these have unique advantages that provide us with the robust recommendation that we combine in the SWOT's analytics. And you'll hear more from our modeling team later on about where we've come in these modeling engines and what's next for us. Yeah. Our team has led the first engineering research on the phenomenon of post-distribution chlorine decay and published a number of papers in leading peer-reviewed journals describing our modeling methods, and they're completely open source and available for anyone to implement in their settings. Now, from a field user perspective, here's how data collection works. The SWOT works on the principle of paired water quality sampling. Each paired sample consists of a time measurement FRC at the tap stand with a follow-up at the household from the same water 6 to 24 hours later. So what you do is first you test the water quality at your tap stand as you normally would. Mainly, we're concerned with FRC, but we can also use electrical conductivity and water temperature data to help improve the accuracy of the modeling results. We then accompany the water collector back to their home and mark the container. And then we return to test the water quality again after the normal duration of household storage and use. So we only have to look at the FRC at the household, and that time can be 6 to 24 hours later. Now, the SWOT requires about 150 of these paired samples in order to provide an accurate recommendation. And users typically collect those 150 paired samples either as part of their routine monitoring, because they're already testing at the top stand, already testing at the household. So we just combine the two together, or as part of a specific assessment, like a big CAP survey where we're doing a lot of household monitoring. So either one of those two modalities can work and integrate with the SWOT. This is the same data that is used for monitoring and quality assurance and reporting. So we use the data that's already being collected widely in the sector for building these site-specific and evidence-based chlorination targets. Now, let me walk you through quickly some of the work we've done on building and testing the tool. The SWOT is built on years of water safety research in refugee camps, including foundational research we carried out in South Sudan, Jordan, and Rwanda. We've carried out field implementations and deployments of the version 1 prototype in Bangladesh, Uganda, Somaliland, Syria, Nigeria, and Tanzania. And we've been working with seven implementing partners across these contexts. In 2019, we carried out a major proof of concept study of the prototype SWOT to see if the chlorination target generated by the SWOT could improve household water safety outcomes compared to the status quo humanitarian FRC standards. We carried out this proof of concept study at the Kutupalong Bulakali camp in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, in collaboration with MSF and BRAC. Now, what we saw at the Kutupalong Bulakali site was that with the status quo practice, meaning using the sphere chlorination targets, at 12 to 18 hours later, which is the typical duration that people were storing and using water at this site, about 42% of them had sufficient residual to protect that water at the point of consumption. However, when the SWOT target was implemented at tap stands, it doubled the proportion of households that had safe water at 12 to 18 hours. So a massive improvement in the effective household water safety by implementing the SWOT. Now, through the proof of concept study, plus the remote pilots we undertook in Nigeria and Tanzania, and all the other field deployments we've been listening to the users of the SWOT on the feedback they have for us and learning from our experience in the field. What we've learned is how we need to adapt the SWOT to make it more effective and suit our users better to help them deliver safe water in emergency settings. We got a couple of key points of feedback that we wanted to build on. One of them was improving our UX, UI, our user experience and user interface to make it more user-friendly and intuitive. We also got feedback that users wanted a results and data visualization dashboard on a web platform, which we didn't have in the version 1. Users also wanted continuous site records and functionality to manage a portfolio of multiple water supply project sites, basically creating an online workspace for water quality. We needed more robust modeling, as well as integration with mobile data collection tools like Kobo. Also, while the SWOT dealt primarily with the problem of chlorination, water safety is a much bigger area of activity. So people wanted training resources, not just on how to use a SWOT, but how to effectively treat water, how to understand and monitor water quality, what does water safety mean, what are other strategies we can implement to protect the safe water chain. And then finally, we got some major feedback around chlorine taste and odor. Of course, as I mentioned before, we're designing between two boundaries, enough to protect the water, but not so much as to drive rejection. So we were getting requests for tools that people could use to assess what is that taste and odor acceptability threshold. We also got some feedback about disinfection byproducts. So when chlorine reacts with natural organic matter in water, could it create another kind of health risk? So looking at what can we do around guidance around disinfection byproducts. And finally, and I think one of the most important ones is that we demonstrated the SWOT in a particular kind of use case, a pipe water system on groundwater sources. But there are a plethora of different water supply use cases in humanitarian settings. There's water trucking, medical facilities, surface water, groundwater sources, and a number of other ones. So we got feedback to demonstrate the SWOT would also work in this full range of water supply use cases. Now, that's where this excellent team comes in. Because since 2020, since we finished our proof of concept with the prototype in Bangladesh, this team has been working incredibly hard to take these learnings and build what is now a web product, going from a prototype to a web product. So I want to acknowledge the role that everybody has had in building this version 2. Professor Usman Khan from the Lausanne School of Engineering, who's here with us today, leads our machine learning analytics development program. Michael DeSanti is our graduate student researcher who's been publishing a whole raft of papers, as you saw, developing the modeling capabilities of the SWOT. Mr. James Brown is our field technical lead. James comes to us with a huge range of experience in operations and coordination in the WASH sector, working with Oxan, GWC, and others, as well as a product design background. So he really understands how to mobilize research and innovation to meet the needs of field users in the sector. A huge thanks as well to Mohammed Mosali, our lead developer and our backend developer, and Awuto Zondo, our front-end developer and graphic designer. Basically, they took what was a prototype using a very outdated technology stack and completely rebuilt it and modernized it using state-of-the-art back-end and front-end design. So the version 2 very much is a product of their expertise and their brilliance. In terms of our advisors, Jeff Fessler from MSF OCA has been ensuring the operational alignment of the tool with the needs of the organizations in the sector. Mike Spenlove is an experienced software architect from industry who advises us on what is the state-of-art best practices for technology that we can deploy in our tool. And James Zerbinski, our Dalila Institute director, ensures that alignment between the research and operational goals of the SWOT project. So thank you very much, everybody, to this team, this fantastic team, in building out this version 2 product. There's also been a number of people who have worked with us in specific capacities over the years. So a special shout out to Professor George Monetz from the Department of Math and Stats at York, who worked with us on the analytics. Professor Spiros Pagiatakis from the Salon School of Engineering, who was an early champion of the SWOT in the School of Engineering. Mr. Matt Arnold, who was our first field advisor, who helped do the proof of concept study in Bangladesh, as well as our remote implementation, from which we learned a great deal. Saad Ali, a chemical engineer who helped us build the initial numerical modeling analytics for the tool. And then Rama Shakir, Dalia Adler, and Apostolos Vasileo, members of Professor Usman Khan's research group, who built some of the initial machine learning models that are used in the tool. So what these folks did was take our version 1 tool, which was pretty basic. It was a prototype, basic UX, UI, basic modeling tools, no site records, email-based reports, very, very basic proof of concept tool that we could put these analytics on the web and generate recommendations that people could use. They took that, and over the past 2 years with these field learnings, built out a whole new state-of-the-art web product that includes a new user experience and user interface, including a web-based data results visualization dashboard, capabilities in the back end for managing sites over time and across a whole portfolio of projects. That required us building out the whole continuous site records for data and then managing these sites. And it sets the stage for doing all sorts of analytics and inquiries with that data for specific sites. And of course, behind all this was the advanced modeling work that Professor Khan and Michael DeSanti have led with the research that they've been publishing and translating into the tool of the SWOT. That's what we're releasing today, but we have a number of things that we're working on right now that we're going to be deploying in the coming months, as well as versions for version 2. There's a chlorine taste and odor threshold tool with which we've been working on with collaborators at Tufts University. So Camille Haling, Gabrielle String, and Danielle Lantan. We've been working with them in deployments in Uganda and in Syria, Somaliland, to develop this new tool that can help us understand that top level, and then figuring out ways to be integrated into the SWOT recommendation. We've also been developing disinfection byproduct guidance and building out those COGO integrations to make the work more streamlined and frictionless for field operators. We've also used this platform now to create a water safety and water treatment knowledge base that we can continuously add resources to in the coming months. Now, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to invite Mr. James Brown, our SWOT field technical advisor, to walk us through what the SWOT version 2 looks and feels like. So James, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Imran, and thanks to everyone who's joining us. Warm welcome from me in Nova Scotia. I see my role really with the SWOT as being the main kind of focal point for user support. And a big part of my role as well is to try and translate the needs and the feedback that we get from our users in the field into improvements in the tool. So I'm really excited about this launch. I think it represents a huge step forward in terms of usability, both in terms of the features and the capabilities, but also in terms of the way that the web app and the info site are set out and are able to be used. Next slide, please. So really the work that we've been doing coalesces around these two products, if you will. So the web tool is where we do all the analytics. It's where all of our modeling is based, and there's a lot of work that I'll talk through. I'll go through just now. At the same time, we have an info site. So this is a website. It's accessed at the same address, and that's got a lot of guidance. It's got a lot of our research, a lot of information about the story and the development. And we'll be adding to that with additional guidance as we move through the steps that Imran's detailed. So we'll go now quickly through the web tool. If you could just next slide, yeah. And click through again. So I want to go through a typical kind of workflow. We did a lot of thinking around how users would be collecting data and how they would be interacting with the website. And this has led to a really good understanding, I would say, about the kind of workflows that we wanted to implement. And so this is detailed in these 4 steps. So firstly, collecting data, uploading that data into the site, setting up the analysis, and then finally, obviously, viewing the results. So next slide, please. So we'll start off with the first step. This is data collection. So in this page of the website, we've got some field monitoring guides. We've got links to an overview video, some sample monitoring forms, and example data sets so you can use to get used to the kind of data collection and data management tasks that are going to be needed for using the tool. At the same time, obviously, we have a lot more information behind the scenes, and we would be very happy to help you access and help you set up monitoring systems for your particular context. Next slide. In terms of uploading data, as Imran suggested, we've based this iteration, this version 2, around being able to add additional data and build up a big data set for a particular field site. So you'll see here at the top, the first task is to, when you're uploading your data, is to assign that data to a particular field site. And that field site will exist within a country and an area that we will set up for you as part of the onboarding process. The next step is to drag and drop your file into the interface. And so the SWOT accepts either a comma separated values or an XLS Excel sheet. And we can provide templates to help you get set up and help you understand kind of the formatting of those files. It's relatively straightforward. Drag and drop that onto the interface, and then you're clicking upload, and that obviously then sends that data into the interface, and we clean that data in the back end, and we create a data set that can then be analyzed. So that's the next step. So this is a send for analysis interface. So the first thing you have to do after you've selected the field site that you're going to be analyzing is to select the date range. So now in this version 2, where you potentially have several months or even years worth of data collection all being stored at the same site, this date range allows you to pick a particular period of time that the SWOT is going to basically select samples from the data set that meet that time period, so that you could potentially use that to analyze what would happen in the summer versus the winter, the dry season versus the wet season. Or of course, you can analyze the entire data set and get the richness of the data throughout the year. The second step is then to set the storage duration. So this is the amount of time that people in your field site are typically storing water. So whether they're collecting water in the morning and storing that throughout the day, or if they're collecting it in the morning and again in the evening, and that storage time period is much shorter. This is what the analysis uses basically to create the FRC target. And then once you've set the options for analysis, you can start the analysis, and then you'll get a notification that the modeling has started. The analysis will progress, and when that's ready, which depending on the size of the data set and the number of samples, could take several minutes or up to an hour. And then you'll get an email that then tells you that analysis has been completed, and you can move to the next step, which is viewing the results. So this is an example of a dashboard with the view results. So you can see there is a single analysis that has been conducted, and that field site is now ready to be viewed. So if you click through into that analysis, you get a very comprehensive dashboard, which will show you all of your results. I'm just going to zoom in. So if we go to the next slide, we should be able to see the various components that exist as part of that results dashboard. So the first thing you'll see is a dataset summary. So this is going to show you the date range that has been analyzed, the number of data samples, and the average storage time that exist in that data set. You'll also see there the current household water safety. So that's the number of household samples in your data set that meet that 0.2 milligrams per liter FRC kind of threshold for water safety. Yep, and then the next thing you'll see is a summary of the analysis that has been requested. So again, it will show you the date range and the length of storage time that you're analyzing for, and the decay scenario. And then you'll see, if you click again, yeah, so you'll see these are the kind of headline results, if you will. So the most important potentially is the SWOT FRC target recommendation. So for this site, it's 0.9 milligrams per liter at the tap stand, and the duration of protection that the analysis was based on. And then you'll get a predicted household water safety score at this storage time. So Mike will talk a little bit more about how this is calculated, but this shows you the potential improvement that could be achieved if you're able to meet that 0.9 milligrams per liter target recommendation at the tap stand. And then one other thing that you'll see is this graph showing how the required FRC, how that FRC target at the tap stand is going to change depending on the amount of storage time that the analysis is run for. So you can see at this graph is showing the dotted line is the 9 hours that we've run the analysis for. And you can see that if we were to increase the storage time to 24 hours, that would produce a very high tap stand FRC. And then you can also obviously download the raw results if you want a more detailed understanding of what's going on in that data set. So that's the general workflow. I think it's relatively simple. It's relatively straightforward to progress through those steps. And obviously we're happy to dig into any more details during the question and answer. So the web tool and info site are both available through the same URL. So that's safeh2o.app. And that's all from me. Thank you so much.
You're muted.
Thank you so much, James, for walking us through what version 2 looks and feels like. Next, I'd like to hand it over to Michael DeSanti, our graduate modeling researcher and professor of Hmong Kong from the Science School of Engineering, who will walk us through some of the work we've been doing in the past few years on the modeling engines underlying the SWOT, and then how that's feeding into the version 2 and future subversions of the tool. So go ahead, Mike and Usman, please take it away.
Yeah, perfect. So as Imran mentioned, when he was explaining the SWOT, we have two modeling engines that run in parallel in the SWOT. And these were driven by some of the problems that Imran mentioned when we talk about the problem of chlorine decay during that post-distribution period. So first of all, there's a lot of variation. Different people handled water different ways. Environmental conditions are going to vary a lot within the settlement, which means that there isn't ever a single right answer for what the FRC will be after a given sort of time. There's always going to be variability. So that was one of the first of the big drivers for how we developed these engines. We also know that conditions are very dynamic, so we want things that were going to be easily retrainable. And we knew that there are going to be many unmeasurable factors, so we needed models that could really build those into the modeling approach, as opposed to trying to over-specify the problem and try to quantify every little different thing that's happening in the site. So in response to that, we have two different modeling engines. The first is what we call the engineering optimization engine, or EO. And this combines some advanced numerical solvers with a chemistry-based model of chlorine decay. So chlorine decay has been studied for decades. And in pipe distributions, they're almost at the point where they understand how it works. For the post-distribution period, where there's a lot less research, so we use a numerical solver that allows us to be very flexible with this modeling approach. And what I think is really beneficial from the engineering optimization tool is because it's a more deterministic model, we get very clear answers from this model. The other approach we use are artificial neural networks, or ANNs. And this is a machine learning type of model. It's a probabilistic risk-based model. So this is where we start quantifying that variability in decay behavior. But because it's machine learning based, it actually learns the underlying decay behavior from the data itself instead of trying to pre-specify behavior, which makes it really powerful and really flexible when we try to quantify, when we try to encapsulate what can be happening in a site. So on the next slide, I'm just going to cover what the new factors that we have in the engineering optimization tool. So we've expanded our original V1 prototype to include multiple chlorine decay models to increase the redundancy and robustness of our model. We're making our computation more, the optimization a bit more computationally efficient to get faster targets. We're projecting out our decay scenarios to simplify re-optimization. And we're also providing confidence assessments in the target so that you can have a better understanding of what's coming out of the models. So let's look at that first one, the multiple chlorine decay models. So as I mentioned, chlorine decay has been studied for decades, but there's still not a lot of consensus, even within pipes distribution systems. So for this post-distribution period, there's even less understanding of how it works in nitty-gritty approach. So we're now expanding from having a single chlorine decay model to having 3 different chlorine decay models. A very simple first-order model, the parallel first-order model, which is very commonly used in water treatment practice, and then the power decay model, which is a really, really super powerful model. It was what we built the first version of the SWOT around, and it's very powerful, but it has a few issues, which I'm going to show on the next slide. So you see here that the after we get to about 15 hours, under certain different model parameters, decay parameters, you'll see that this line just cuts off. And that's because one of the finicky things in the math of the power decay model is that it can just give imaginary numbers, which you can't base a chlorine target around imaginary numbers. And sometimes, especially when we have really clustered storage decay scenarios, we actually see this happening with real life data. And that was one of the big drivers for why we've started to add additional models. The other issue is that sometimes the parallel first order, that pink line, can essentially become just a linear model when it converges to weird sets of parameters. So by having 3 different models, especially the first order decay model, which is very reliable, we can leverage the power of stronger models like the parallel first order and power decay model while still being able to fall back on the first order model if the optimization comes to a solution that doesn't really make sense for a given site. So let's move on to the next aspect, which is computationally efficient optimization. I'll cover this really quickly, but we essentially found a better way to train and identify the decay parameters using a multi-start ensemble approach instead of a grid search approach, which just means that we are running our calculations, we're running fewer calculations and focusing them on areas of high performing parameters instead of exploring a huge search space in a very time consuming, slow approach. And this just means that we can get targets out to users faster. We're going from 15 minutes to under a minute to run the different models now. And if we jump to the next one, James already showed this graph, so I'm not going to put too much time into it, but previously with version 1, if you didn't like your target, you would have to go in and re-optimize for a shorter decay period. Like if you had a target that was just too high, you couldn't make it work on site, you'd have to go in and re-optimize. But for a single decay scenario, we're now providing the data for you to actually pick out that new target after one optimization. So this saves you time on reanalyzing the data and needing to rerun the SWOT for different time periods. So yeah, I think, and the final improvement was a confidence assessment, which essentially looks at different aspects of the data set, the model performance, and the alignment between the data collection and the targets requested to identify what was good in the model and where there might be gaps that might be leading to targets that are not necessarily going to be reflective of what's really needed just due to mismatch between data collection and storage durations, or just if the model's not performing particularly well. So this gives you more information about what's coming out of the model, allows you to know how confident you can be with the targets. So yeah, just to briefly summarize the changes with the EO, we've added additional decay models to increase redundancy and provide more robust optimization. We're using a more computationally efficient approach to get faster results. We're providing you with the data to make easy target readjustments on your own. And we're also providing some deeper insight into the analytics through confidence assessment. So now with the neural networks, we have 3 main changes. The first one is probabilistic performance assessment, which is related to us really committing to this probabilistic mindset within the artificial neural networks. Then we've actually got a dynamic input variable selection approach to simplify how your data goes into the SWOT, dealing with it on our end, as opposed to putting the burden onto the data collectors. And then we're implementing scenario analysis to give you more ability to pick targets that are going to work for your specific conditions. So the first one, this is a probabilistic performance assessment graph. On the left, we're showing the predictions, the spread of the predictions against the spread of the observations. And then on the right, we have 2 diagnostic figures. In our report, we provide some additional context for what these figures mean. But the point of this is it gives first of all, model diagnostics, so you can see if the model is performing well, if it's not, where it's performing well, and where it's not performing well. But it also is part of a really key shift in our mindset on the ANNs to really embracing probabilistic modeling as the way that we're moving forward on the artificial neural networks. So the next, and this is really explained well in our NPJ Clean Water publication, and that was really the motivation and where we explain how that differs from what we were previously doing with a more deterministic-ish approach. So the next change is very much about the data going into the SWOT. So in the version 1 prototype, we had a lot of initial analyses that showed that time was not a strong predictor of chlorine decay using the artificial neural network approach. And because of that, we didn't include it as a predictor in the version 1. However, that also meant that we couldn't set targets for a specific time. So as we developed version 2, we began a new assessment of how can we incorporate time into the SWOT so that we're not just putting this variable in so we can set a target at a specific storage duration, but actually get value out of the storage duration. And we found that if we use the timestamps and got the collection time, whether it was morning or afternoon, just that nice little binary divide, we got a lot more value out of having the storage duration in the model. So we are now allowing you to use the ANNs with a specific storage time in mind, and also building a new variable that we can build straight out of the data you're collecting. You don't need to do anything else to get even more value out of that storage time. The other approach, the other main change to the input variable selection is Imran mentioned that we have optional EC, electrical conductivity, and water temperature data collection, but that's not always feasible on site. And the version 1 prototype of the SWOT was not good at dealing with missing measurements of either electrical conductivity or water temperature. And that was leading to some skewing of the targets. So in the version 2, we've developed a dynamic approach to including or dropping variables, or including or dropping samples based off of available data, so that the tool, and we've built this based on many rigorous tests to find the best approach to handling this through a few set of rules in the back end, so that you can now focus on collect the data that you can and let the SWOT deal with missing measurements or choosing which variables to use if there are a large number of missing measurements or if you can't collect something. And then our final change is related to scenario analysis. So previously in the version 1 SWOT, we built a risk profile out based off of kind of the average site conditions. However, unsafe water doesn't always happen on the average days. It's often in these worst case scenarios. So when the water is the warmest, causing accelerated decay, when there's the highest number of dissolved compounds that can react with the FRC, that can often contribute to additional water safety risk. So we now actually use 4 different scenarios, an average case and a worst case. This relates to the water quality. So average case would use average conductivity and water temperature. Worst case uses upper 95th percentile for water temperature and conductivity. And then also looking at the time of collection, because we found that that does really drive the rate of safety, so that you can now, for different tapped in FRC concentrations, look at the range of potential risks that can happen under these different scenarios. So that's giving field users a much better understanding, instead of saying one scenario is going to happen all the time, of understanding what will happen in different conditions. So now, just to finally give a quick recap, we're implementing clear and probability-based model diagnostics. We're making our modeling much more adaptable to the data already being collected, and we're generating different targets for different scenarios to give field users a better ability to tailor the target to their conditions and to what they are most worried about. So finally, I'd like to wrap up with just a roadmap for where we're going. So I've discussed a lot of the version 1 and the version 2 analytics. Imran, if you can just click through. So coming forward for the new versions, we've already begun working on advanced ANN training. We found that the biggest room for improvement in improving the ANN analytics is to improve the way that we train them, which is a really novel and exciting, groundbreaking approach that we're taking in the machine learning analytics, and also now building in that probabilistic mindset into the engineering optimization tool. We've published some early results from the ANNs and PLOS Water and presented some of the preliminary probabilistic ensembles at the Canadian Society for Civil Engineering conference this year. And all that's to say is that this is already underway. We are already starting down this road towards these updates. And then finally, what we're really excited about in version 2.2 is, instead of treating these as 2 separate branches of modeling and analytics, actually integrating them using hybrid modeling, so that instead of 2 branches running in parallel, it's one unified modeling approach.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike and Usman, for walking us through just the phenomenal amount of research you've been leading on applying really cutting-edge data-driven modeling techniques to this humanitarian health problem. So thank you so much for walking us through and showing how it links up with the SWOT product. And we'll come back to, if there's any questions around the analytics, we'll come back to that in the final Q&A discussion. The next session, part of this session, will be a field user perspective. So here I'd like to invite Jeff Vesely, the Watson Unit Coordinator from MSF OCA, to offer some remarks about how the SWOT fits in with the MSF's work in the field, and what are some new emerging questions from MSF's experience that need addressing, that potentially the SWOT can feed into too. So Jeff, I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Imran, and a very warm greetings from the Netherlands. It's dark here, so I'm sorry for the lightning. I try to adjust a little bit my workspace I'm working from home, so yeah, that's how you get. I'm not as professional as all of the other presenters. I want to thank everyone to being attending, but I really want to thank the team in York and the Dali Institute, sorry, and especially James Orbinski, without whom this would never have been developed and gone as far as it is today. I'd like to particularly thank Imran, with whom I've been enjoying working, discussing, thinking, looking at the future, and that's been for almost a decade now. And I like to thank the team also, the Matt, the James, the Michael, the Usman, who've been also really helpful in this process. And listening to what was said before, you can really see that, you know, it's a huge project. It started from a simple problem in the field that we've seen that there were really problems with the water and the safety of water. The water was not safe, and we could see the impact on the populations we were taking care at the time in the camps in South Sudan. And we can see that the primary question for all this work was coming from the field, and we can see how it has evolved and how the different iteration are still taking into consideration the user perspective and also the well-being of the people who are using the water. So I have the privilege to work with a medical humanitarian organization that is MSF, and this gave us over the time to work in different settings, outbreaks, emergencies, camp settings, and health structures. And as a specialist, as a water and sanitation specialist, we are still one of the public health arms of the organization. And that's really important to say, that we are we are almost a tool for the organization to reach the people in different settings. And the people that we are reaching are refugees, IDPs. They are patients also inside of the hospitals and our own staff. One of the things is chlorine is one of our main tool to provide safe water. But one of the key point here is, by providing safe water to people or to the patients, it comes with a responsibility. And it's not only to put a little bit of chlorine in the water and distribute the water. We need to make sure that the water is safe for the people who are going to be using that water. And on top of it, we need to be transparent about that. But in order to be transparent about the water we provide, we need also to monitor. And this is one of the elements that is really important about the SWOT, is that it allows you also to monitor what you do. So this is really a key element. So we need to make sure the water is safe when we produce it, when we distribute it, but also up to the time the people are using that water. And in hospital settings, but also anywhere else, but in a hospital setting, because you have your patients that are really potentially susceptible to other infections, when you are dealing with patients out of a surgery, you also want to make sure the water is not a source of contamination. So this is really a huge responsibility for the teams and for the WATSANs, or the water and sanitation specialists in particular. So I think one of the objectives of MSF and the work that we are trying to do now is to more holistically to water quality. So not only from the bacteriological quality, which we are already doing, but I think from a more holistic perspective with all the different elements into the water. So we are also translating that ambition also to have a more holistic view in terms of water quality in protocols, policies, and also in developing, well, finding the needs to develop a better database and analysis on this data that we are collecting. And one thing that I want to add regarding the SWOT is also an opportunity because you have teams in the field that are going to the homes of the patients or to the homes of the IDPs or the refugees. It's an opportunity to understand what people get. What are the situations of people? How are they living? And that's a great opportunity for us to pursue community engagement, because by the people going to the field, our specialists going to the homes, we have a dialogue with the community. So that's really an important aspect also. So we're hoping also that with the new version of the SWOT, but also the further development and the research we are engaged in, that this will continue to develop, that will have more opportunities to use the SWOT in our programs and much earlier than what we are able to do so, because it will be easier to use. Yeah, and I think this is really one of the things that we would like to get, and I think this is really on the agenda of the team right now, is making sure that we also prove that the SWOT has a direct impact on the health of the people we serve. So I will stop here, and I think this is my little contribution.
Thank you, Jeff, so much for walking us through how the SWOT fits into MSF's operations and some ideas and questions for the future development of it. We'll circle back to some of those ideas that you mentioned just now in the closing remarks. But at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Professor Urbinsky, who will moderate a discussion around any questions that are coming from the audience with the presenters and panelists today. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand and you can ask your question verbally, or you can add it into the Q&A function, and Professor Urbinsky will find the questions and pose it to the panel. So please, Professor Urbinsky, take it away.
That's great. Thanks, Imran. And I'm not quite used to being called Professor Urbinsky as much as you're actually calling me Professor Urbinsky. I have to keep, who is that? Anyway. With that, I'd like to introduce Professor Jennifer Heidman from the Vice President of Research and Innovation Office. She's the Associate Vice President, and let's hope that third time is lucky. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Okay, testing. Can you hear me? All right. I rebooted and I closed my 7 programs and 25 open files. So thanks everyone for your patience. It's a little late to welcome you to the event, but let me congratulate the Institute, the team, and everybody on this incredible piece of work. It's something incredibly close to my heart, or maybe my gut, I should say, as someone who worked in camps. I share with Jeff a different kind maybe of user experience. And perhaps I'll just say just 1 or 2 words. I was going to say that Dr. Imran Ali and I met back in 2016 at a humanitarian conference that the Red Cross put on. And I was completely baffled that the sphere standards for water were wrong. And his talk just excited me beyond measure. they were based on, city conditions and urban, urban standards that did not apply to the camps, the kind of camps that I was working in. And no one ever thought that we all assumed it was the jerry can that was the problem. So this new method is strikingly innovative. The paired samples, incredibly important. The analytics, incredibly exciting. As someone who takes water seriously, as you can see, and some of my research is on the tsunami, and I won't get into how that might apply with the SWOT tool, but I'm really just delighted as a researcher, as a social scientist. I'm not trying to be a discussant or anything here, but the social science perspective is remarkable, because now you're measuring time in the jerry can versus, the quality of water in the jerry can after 12 to 18 hours versus at the tap when you first fill it up. So having been many times at the doctor getting my antibiotics to clean up the gut full of friends from the water supplies, I think this is, incredibly groundbreaking research. Wonderful to see SWOT 1.0, now 2.0, and 2.3 or 2 coming to fruition. So huge congratulations, and thanks for giving me this spot at the end of the program. I'm sorry I was unable to join you earlier.
Jennifer, thank you so much. Thanks for being so warm and welcoming, and also being so generous just in recognizing the relationship of this apparently very technical project to very real and major public health needs and humanitarian emergencies. And also, finally, thanks for being persistent, staying with us through some technical difficulties. So thanks for that. I have a number of questions for our speakers. And I would also encourage people to ask questions through the Q&A box, or again, as Imran has said, to raise your hand. I'd just like to ask a very basic question, Imran, and perhaps you or someone on the among the panelists can address it. What is the specific mechanism for chlorine decay, and why is there variance between chlorine at different points in the water supply chain, and how does that interact with those factors that actually amplify chlorine decay? Is it a evaporation mechanism? Is it a oxidation mechanism, a deoxidation mechanism? What is the actual mechanism? That I think will have a lot of bearing on my understanding of where we're at thus far. That's my first question. Over to you, Imran.
In traditional professorial format, what I'm going to do is defer this question to our graduate student, Michael DeSanti, to answer, because Michael's been doing a lot of deep diving into what factors drive chlorine decay. He's working on a paper right now on this topic. So I'm going to ask Mike to respond to this question.
Hi, thanks so much, James, for the question, Imran, for passing it off to me, because as James was asking this question, I was like, oh, I have so many ideas. But it's not one. The real answer and the real reason why this is such a challenging problem, why we're running 2 different modeling engines, why we need to take a risk-based probabilistic approach, is it's not a single decay mechanism, and it's not even the same mix necessarily all over the world. So yeah, we are working on a paper right now where we had a site where users were storing water outside in the sunlight a lot. And in that case, we are seeing a really significant contribution of sunlight storage in addition to water quality driving decay, which means that there's actually like this reaction between photons from UV radiation interacting with the chlorine to cause FRC decay. But in other sites, we're finding that where the wash service point coverage doesn't meet sphere standards, we found that transferring water between containers has a significant contribution to FRC decay, but not in sites where there is sufficient coverage of water points. So it's not, so in that case, we know that there's clearly a behavioral driver of decay. We found consistently at our sites that different water quality parameters are contributing to decay. So it isn't one, it's all of them. I don't know if that answers the question. Sorry, James. I think-
James, you're muted.
Yeah, it does begin to answer the question, and thank you for that. I do think, however, there's a very important distinction that we should recognize between the mechanism of decay and those forces, factors, or causes and conditions that amplify decay. And we'll certainly see that there are different amplifying factors in different settings, and depending on, for example, environmental settings, depending on forms of storage, movement of water between storage entities, for example, hygiene behaviors, and so on. All of those things will depending on the particularities, cause changes in the amplification of decay. But the actual mechanism of decay, I think it would be important for us to be able to understand that very specifically, so that the appropriate interventions can be marshaled. But in any case, I think your answer, James, was very helpful. So thank you for that. Did you want to comment further, Imran, or others?
Yeah, maybe I can offer just a brief comment to that. And thank you, Mike, so much for walking us through the multiplicity of fact mechanisms that could be at work, and James for highlighting the role that certain influences can amplify certain effects. It's such a complex, set of phenomenon that occur in that post-distribution setting, where basically we're very good at engineering within closed systems. So in a distribution network, we can model it pretty well. But once it leaves the tap, it's open to a whole world of mechanisms and influences that are very difficult to characterize. And they are going to be site-specific and temporally changing as well. So that's really the power of the SWOT here, is that we can take all that natural variability in the real world open system and using these modeling tools, characterize it, and then generate what are risk-based chlorination targets that help a water system operator understand, given the prevailing conditions at this time and place, here's what your different behaviors, different practices will output in terms of household water safety. It would be an immense research effort to characterize the influence of each of these mechanisms. We don't need to do that immediately for the operational benefit. We can use these techniques of machine learning and process-based modeling to gain that insight from the data that we already collect. And that's what the SWOT does.
That's great. Thank you. Excuse me. I also have a question for James Brown around neural networks. You talked a little bit about advanced neural networks and the training of those networks, and the introduction as well of probabilistic projections as part of that training process. Can you just talk about that a little bit more and talk about your approach to integrating these different factors into the neural network?
I could just about begin to discuss that. I think I'm going to once again pass that over to our neural network expert, Michael.
Yeah, so the way that we're addressing probabilistic now in the version 2 is through something called an ensemble forecasting system, where, and this is what's really exciting, this is a model type that's gone back decades, and it's actually how we get our weather forecast, is through these ensemble forecasting systems, which group together many models with many different, they can be the same high-level model, but making sure that there's significant differences in the parameters, so that when you group together, in our case, 200 predictions, they're not 200 of the same prediction, they're 200 unique predictions that we can then treat as a probability distribution function. So yeah, PDF. What we're going forward, particularly with the very advanced artificial neural networks, what we've been focusing on is changing how we measure the difference between a prediction and an observation while training the networks to really be, instead of using more common training approaches like the mean error, which is how linear regression works, we're looking at measuring specifically the using probabilistic measures, so distribution parameters, differences between the moments of the distribution. So getting really deep into our stats to drive how we penalize a bad prediction and, well, not how we penalize it, but how we identify a bad prediction and identify a good prediction, and thus penalize bad predictions, reward good predictions during training. So does that begin to answer the question?
Yeah, it does very nicely, in fact. And I'd just like to introduce a dimension to that I think might be important, which I don't know how you're thinking about it. But especially when you're, as you say, when you're trying to allow for a distinction between an observation and a prediction, and they're very different things, right? Where and how do you introduce the concept of a gold standard? So in other words, where do you know, how do you know that, or how do you assess the accuracy of your prediction relative to reality? Is there any point where you do that in your process?
Yeah, so throughout all of our model development process, and we actually have we have an approach for this built into the SWOT for a live diagnostics approach. We're not using it too much just because of the time constraints. We don't want to be essentially running the SWOT, checking it, and then running it all over again, just because that would be very slow for people who need analytics now. But all of the performance that we publish in all of our publications is always on what's called an independent test set. So model that was never shown, so data that was never shown to the model when we're training it. And then we use ensemble verification metrics, which are measures, which are different ways of measuring the probabilistic performance. So not the, not like square difference between predictions, but actually how close to identical are the observed and predicted distributions. And again, we only do that on data that the model has not been trained on. So we're always assessing the model on a generalization. So the ability to predict on new data in a new site, or at the same site in a new time period on the same site with different data. That's really what we always drive our evaluation on independent data, because we know that that's what matters. It doesn't, being able to get perfect accuracy during training doesn't mean anything if we can't give good predictions for what's going to happen in the future, because that's how the SWOT is being used, to predict what's going to happen.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And I will note that Brian Reed and Marco Verber in the question and answer box have asked questions that really deal with sampling techniques, chlorine levels, and other dimensions of the SWOT. And I just want to make sure, Imran, that we have enough time. We're going to end at 12:30. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we have a few minutes to closing remarks, but I think we can take some of these questions very quickly. And then anything we don't get to, we can offer written responses to afterwards.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So I'm just going to read a question, one of Marco's questions. Did local authorities or stakeholders include the SWOT in their guidelines or policy and water safety plan? Is that something that has happened or is starting to happen? Imran?
Yeah, Marco, that's a great question. Thank you for posing it. Yeah, so far we've been doing pilot tests in particular sites with agencies so that they understand what the SWOT is and how to deploy it. They haven't been formalized and mainstreamed into their operating procedures yet. So we're starting that process now. Really, now that we've built the version 2, this is an opportunity for us to communicate with our current users and start mainstreaming it into their operations. So we've worked with UNHCR in Tanzania, MSF in Nigeria, other organizations, Oxfam in Uganda, other organizations elsewhere. Now we're at a stage, we've demonstrated a specific site, how the SWOT can help deliver the water safety goals. And now we can start mainstreaming it. And there's interest at UNHCR, Oxfam, and others to scale it up across those countries. So that's the next stage for us, is scaling this tool and into the sector, into the ways of working of the sector. And that's what we'll be doing the next 6 months period.
That's great. Thank you. Here's a question from Megan Lindmark, and I'm going to just read it. It's quite a clear and precise question. I'm just going to read it to you. Could the SWOT be used for piped distribution networks where storage time might not be the number or driver for decay, but instead storage time over distribution network and potential other contaminants may also be drivers? So could you just comment on that? And could the SWOT be used for pipe distribution networks, for example? And how might that be different from some of the other applications you've described?
Yeah, Megan, really fantastic question. This really is the next area of development for us. We've been looking at that post-distribution situation because there are not existing solutions for that, and that last mile really matters for water safety and public health. But absolutely, we can also optimize what's happening within the distribution network. We started to get into this work now looking at water trucking. So water trucking, you can think of sort of like a moving pipe. We're starting to model what's happening inside water trucking situations and emergencies. And from there, we like to get into next, how do we optimize within the distribution network? We're starting to collect some data in Somaliland, so within a distribution network in a medical facility to optimize that component. And looking at what other kinds of data could be potential inputs here is another priority. I'd also put it to Mike and Usman if they want to comment here as well about the application of machine learning tools for distribution systems. What is the scope of potential here?
Okay, hi everyone. I'll take this one. Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a potential to use these in pipe systems in urban areas, but something that we're quite interested in is also looking at remote and small communities in Canada, or during times of emergencies where you might have intermittent water supply. So all of these conditions are the types of conditions where the SWOT can be useful. And that's something that Mike, Imran, and I are trying to do over the next 2 years, try and incorporate it into public water distribution systems.
Okay, thank you, Usman. I think we'll move now, Imran, if you don't mind, to closing remarks.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Brian, for this couple of questions here from you, Marco. What we'll do is we'll keep all these questions and we'll write full proper responses to them and then circulate to the meeting registration list, whoever attended, so we can make sure we answer those questions appropriately. And they're very important questions. So thank you, Brian. Thank you, Marco, for posing them. We're just coming to the end of the session here, and I just wanted to offer a few, kind of high-level remarks about, where we're going next here. So one thing that James talks about a lot is, we've built a safe water optimization tool right now, but I think James feels we're not being ambitious enough. There's a whole range of safe optimization tools that can address real pressing public health challenges in emergency, in LMIC, in a Canadian context. And this is really the next step for us. So in version 3, we're already planning to bring in new components that can help streamline the work for water system operators in emergencies. This includes geospatial elements. So can we map our data? Can we query it? Can we see what the lay of land is to give people, operators and managers and coordination overview of how water safety is behaving at a particular site? And this gets to some of the questions that Brian raised about the variability spatially at a site. So we want to address that in the version 3, bringing in some geospatial elements. One other big component for us is right now we're reliant on using paired data. So looking at the tap stand and looking at the household, there's still insight in unpaired data, and we're trying to figure out ways we can unlock that information from unpaired data. So these are some of the major V3 things that we're thinking about. But moving beyond just the microbiological water safety chlorination problem, there's a range of other challenges relating to water and public health and emergencies that we think we want to create tools around that can help support operators in these settings. So one big provocation from Jeff has been, can we expand looking from just microbiological water quality chlorination to chemical water quality more broadly, and looking at it in medical facilities where there are vulnerable populations who we want to protect from the chemical water quality aspects as well? Can we build different tools or interfaces that relate to different humanitarian water supply use cases? That's another area of development. And one big area that we're exploring now is, we've been focusing very exclusively on chlorination, but chlorination is just a proxy for the microbiological water quality of water, and then eventually the health outcomes. So Mike is leading some work now under Usman's and my supervision, looking at how we can deploy AI methodologies to quantitative microbial risk assessment. So we can build a safe optimization tool that not just tells us what we should chlorinate, but what is the expected burden of disease in the population under different kinds of practices. So these are some of the future thinking for the SWOT that we're exploring in the next 3-year period. Now, this work that we're doing is all an initiative of what we're calling the Humanitarian Water Lab here at the Davila Institute for Global Health Research. And, as you've heard today, we are a group of practitioners and researchers. Like, we understand the field, we have worked in the field, and we're trying to now mobilize research to address the questions that are coming out of the field. So the SWOT is one example of it, but there are many other research initiatives we're leading here at the Humanitarian Water Lab, addressing those pressing questions from the field. Now, before I conclude, I just want to offer, really, really warm thanks to our core funders, the ACMEA Foundation, Humanitarian Innovation Fund at ALRA, and Grand Challenges Canada, the Humanitarian Grand Challenge, as well as our research collaborators at Tufts University, across York, in the different departments, including at the Science School of Engineering, and of course, our field users who have been bravely implementing the technology and trying it out and helping us understand how we can improve it. So thank you very much to the whole network of people who have been involved in getting the SWOT to this place. Finally, for those who are interested in getting to use the tool, and we'll be reaching out, we're here to provide technical support, training workshops, and site-specific advice. We're committed to getting safe water to the people who need it. SWOT is one component of that, but we're here to offer advice on the full range of activities to achieve that public health goal. So please reach out to us, check out our website, but also on Twitter, and we're here to support you. And I'm going to stop right there and hand it over to James for the final remarks. Sorry, James, for taking too much time there. Go ahead, James.
Oh, no problem. No problem. That was great, Imran. I think what is really self-evident here is that this package of application around the Safe Water optimization tool is a perfect almost marriage of the academic research environment and the practical operational field demand that exists around humanitarian issues. It's very exciting for me to see and to support the evolution of the Safe Water optimization tool through its various versions. And it's very exciting and very gratifying, frankly, I think, as director of a research institute at York, to see real progress and to see how the team responds to real issues, but also to some pressure. I'm pretty good at putting pressure on people. And Imran has actually really led, I think, and continues to lead just incredible outcomes in terms of water optimization for humanitarian emergencies. I've been pretty clear and helpful, I hope, with Imran's thinking around how to imagine a humanitarian water lab. And how to frame that in terms of real world tools and applications. And I'm very happy to continue to support and to continue to assist in whatever way I can the emergence of a humanitarian water engineering lab here at the Institute. And I would also just say that just to be a little more precise about some of the opportunities, in addition to what Imran has outlined, there are real opportunities around integrating biosensors, for example, into practical tools that can not simply make probabilistic assessments and determinations, but actual database determinations and assessments on live pathogenic contamination of water. And from that, one can make extremely accurate intervention proposals for various organizations to reduce the risk of outbreak. There are also all kinds of potential applications around electrolytes in water and implications for electrolyte concentration in feeding center settings, for example. All kinds of implications around other contaminants. So, for example, arsenic contamination, which has massive, as we know, public health implications. So these tools have a whole range of applications, and I'm very excited about seeing them explored more fulsomely and more fully through the Humanitarian Water Lab. And I would just like to close by saying that partnership is really the key to developing practical, critical problem-solving tools. Partnership with MSF, and Jeff, thanks for your kind words earlier. The partnership with Médecins Sans Frontières has been and continues to be a really central partnership, and the partnership with other entities like OCHA, Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the Red Cross, and other major humanitarian actors has been and will be really, really vital to the future progress and growth of the Humanitarian Water Engineering Lab, which I think in our changing world is going to become even more and more necessary in terms of the kind of practical tools and products that we're able to create. So with that, congratulations to this extraordinary team of people who have worked really hard over the last few years to really develop, again, highly practical, useful tools that have saved and will continue to save, and with even more improvement, will further improve the lives of literally thousands, if not millions of people. So let's keep going, and let's keep that goal as the #1 goal for everything and all that we do. So with that, thank you.